The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Our long local nightmare is over. The MASN dispute has been settled. The Nationals will have all kinds of money to go out and get free agents. I don't know if that's going to happen. Well, we'll take a look at what came down yesterday. At 20 years they have been battling this out. They've been in court almost nonstop over the years, but finally, what was done to pacify Peter Angelos has come to a conclusion. The Nats will spend one more season on MASN, then they become essentially television free agents. But the landscape has changed dramatically since that deal was made in 2005 as part of the agreement to bring the Montreal Expos to Washington and give us baseball. 20 years. Isn't that amazing? 20 years of Nationals baseball, and I'm from a generation that went 33 years without a team. I do remember the expansion Senators. My dad watched the original Senators, which left town 1960 to become the Minnesota Twins, immediately replaced by the expansion Senators, who left town after 71, and we had no team until 2005. And finally, that has been resolved. What it's going to mean, there's all kinds of speculation. Part of it is that maybe the Lerners are going to sell the team, that the uncertainty about the television is now gone, and that would free the way to do that. The other side of it is, okay, they got some certainty now. They can get moving, and they don't have naming rights on the stadium, which is really amazing, and they don't have one of those patches on the uniform, a uniform rights package. So they're not getting money from those two revenue streams, and now they're supposed to get a big check. There was a dispute, I think, over about $300 million, which was awarded in court to the team, but we've gone all this time with them being, out of the money, fighting for the money, I should say. And as Barry Zerluga points out in his column today, since they signed Steven Strasburg in 2019 after the World Series to that $245 million extension, which turned out to be a horrible deal, but since they signed him to that deal, which I believe was 7 years, the longest contract that they have signed to a player is 3 years for Keibert Ruiz, 8 years, $50 million. Relative chump change when you're talking about $700 million deals in baseball. But that's where they are, and where this is going to take them, we'll find out. We'll get into more of that a little bit later. The thing I wanted to kick off things with is happy birthday to Gary Williams, who is 80 years old today. And I think of the way he coached and how he would sweat through his suit. And I remember sitting behind the bench for big games that he coached and watching him in action. And I thought, man, that guy's not going to last very long. Well, he's 80, looks 50. If he colored his hair, he might look 40. I mean, whatever he's doing, it's working out for him. You see him at games from time to time. He was at the Michigan State game last week and sitting with his wife, and he looks just great. And I think of him winning the national championship in 2002 when he was 57 years old. Looked a lot younger than that, coached another decade or so, retired after, I think it was the 2010-2011 season. And I always thought, as young as he looked, that he might get back in at some point. But he has not. He's done some broadcasting. He's got some other things that he's involved in. I see him from time to time, very, very affable guy. He's involved with the school in raising money. I believe he still has an office there, if I'm not mistaken. But, he's still a very, very valuable asset to the University of Maryland. And, for all you couch doctors who look at a man sweating through his suit, saying, "Oh my God, how can you do that?" Whatever it was, it worked for him, And at 80 years old, If you saw him today, you'd never guess he was that age. And happy birthday to Gary Williams, who brought so much joy to this area, particularly 23 years ago when he won the national championship at Maryland. And that was the second year of going back-to-back to the Final Four. Actually, a couple of years later, he achieved something that he said was almost as important as winning the national championship, and that was winning the ACC championship. And kind of a revenge to Duke after blowing the 22-point lead in the Final Four in 2001. The big comeback that they had in the ACC championship game against Duke, winning in overtime, that was as meaningful to him in many ways as the national title. And to leave Maryland with a pair of Final Fours, the most wins in school history, an ACC championship, all those things, a big salute to Gary Williams, who's 80 years old today and sure as hell doesn't look it. All right, more follow-up on the Deebo Samuel trade that was made over the weekend. I mean, they give up a fifth-round pick. No big deal there. They're absorbing $17.5 million in salary, but they have it. I mean, that's the great thing about all that cap room. Last year when Adam Peters went through free agency and obviously did a great job in bringing in guys like Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu and Zach Ertz and the job that they did in the draft, and no better job than taking Jaden Daniels, number one. All those things that they did left them still with an enormous amount of cap room, plus the cap goes up this year. Now, that's not meaningful really because everybody's cap goes up. So relative to all the other teams, it stays the same. But they have money to spend, and why not spend it on a guy who may or may not, come back and have a year similar. I don't think he's capable of having the year he had in 2021 when he had 14 touchdown catches and 1,700 yards and was an all-pro, not just a Pro Bowler, but an all-pro. But it's, worth the risk. And again, when they brought in Zach Ertz last year, it was a big yawn for me. He wound up being their second leading receiver and made some enormous catches, including the game winner in overtime against Atlanta. So don't sell this organization short when it looks at players who may or may not have enough tread left on the tire. Deebo Samuel may have that. Tony and Mike, with the first opportunity to take a swing at this yesterday, with the trade taking place over the weekend, these were their thoughts on the deal to bring Samuel here.
What does this do for Jaden Daniels in Washington, and where does this leave the Niners?
Well, I'm going to dismiss the Niners. The Niners know how to replace people. They know how to draft. They know how to sign. They have money. They don't whine. They go get people, and they contend. That's the end of the Niners portion of my comment. Washington, the Commanders. I mean, Tony, it gives them a weapon. And look, I don't know. My fascination, as you alluded to, with Deebo Samuel for years. Yeah, I don't know whether he was just in a funk because he sort of wanted to be paid more and kind of sort of didn't want to be there, or is he done? Which one? He's taken a lot of hits. He's played that combination position of receiver, running back, and been so terrific at it. Tony, and when you add him to Terry McLaurin, and I hear people saying, well, he's not really a number two anymore. I don't want to hear that. He's a weapon. However you decide to deploy him with a young, ambitious quarterback who is his own weapon himself with his legs, in addition to throwing the football, it does, I don't know, it should boost everybody who's in that locker room and following that team in Washington to have Deebo Samuel on board.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with any of that. You're 100% right on all of these things. This could be potentially a complete steal for Washington. They gave up nothing. They gave up a fifth-round pick. The general manager now at Washington was working with the 49ers when Samuel was drafted. He saw him at his best. Now, he has regressed the last few years. In 2021, Mike, he had a total of 14 touchdowns through either passing or receiving yards or rushing yards. In the next 3 years, he had a total of 16 in 3 seasons. But he was unhappy, sort of like Jimmy Butler. He didn't want to be there. I mean, if he's anything close, if his skill set is anywhere close to what it was 3 and 4 years ago, then Washington has a great weapon. And as you say, opposite Terry McLaurin, if you're Jaden Daniels, you have to be thrilled. And if you look at the Washington team objectively, you would say they are now a contender for the conference championship. They were a fluke getting in this year, but now they would be a contender. And I agree with you about San Francisco. San Francisco isn't going to miss him at all. because the Deebo Samuel they wanted didn't want to play there anymore. He was already lost. That's right. He was already lost. Yeah. And Kyle Shanahan knows how to plug and play. He knows how to do it. So you and I are in accord on this whole thing.
We are.
Yeah.
5th round pick is the way to go. I mean, come on. Even if he only has last year's numbers, Tony, sort of 800-yard-ish and 3 or 4 touchdowns for a 5th round pick. Now, you want to get more out of him than that, and I bet you they will. I'll bet you they'll get more out of him than that.
That's Tony and Mike on the Deebo deal. There is a school of thought that they got within a game of the Super Bowl, and this might be the missing piece. You went from 4 wins to 12 wins in one season, and I said this after they lost to Philadelphia, referencing the Bum Phillips quote when the Houston Oilers lost the AFC Championship game to the Pittsburgh Steelers after the 78 season, and Bum Phillips and the Oilers came back to a packed Astrodome with people going crazy about the season they had with this rookie Earl Campbell, and Bum said to the crowd, "This year we knocked on the door. Next year we're going to kick the damn door down." And they lost the following year to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that was pretty much it as the Oilers being contenders. I'm not saying that's going to happen here, but I think this is an important point to look at and put into perspective. And it's what Dan Orlovsky said yesterday on our morning show on Sportsmanlike, in that, yes, this has been a remarkable improvement. You have your franchise quarterback, it looks like, for a decade or more in Jaden Daniels. All signs are pointing up. But a little bit of perspective check on aisle 6 from Dan Orlovsky of ESPN.
I really like it for Washington, the versatility. They play with 2 backs on offense. They like to spit the ball to the perimeter and get the ball into players' hands and allow them to do things. Deebo obviously is somebody that does that. I find Washington really interesting because everyone's like, man, how close are they? And I think Washington has to be very cautious of listening to some of the stuff on the outside, because we can sit here and think that they're that close because of the season that they had. It's a lie. It's a mirage. They won 5 games on the last play of the year. That, you know that in CC, that's not real in the NFL. And so if you win 3 of them on the last play of the year, that's not that consistent. So I don't want Washington to get caught up in the success end result of last year, thinking we are 1 or 2 moves away from being bona fide real Super Bowl contenders. Last year was sensational. Give them credit for it. But I do think that their vantage point has to be, we lost those 5 games in the last play of the season, and we didn't get in. And they need to have an attack mindset with their roster rather than we are a piece or 2 away. But I do think it's a good move for Washington.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think Adam Peters recognizes that. When he was asked at the end of the season, he and Dan Quinn did a joint news conference a couple days after the loss to Philadelphia, and he said that each year is different, and each year you start at the bottom. So they're not looking at this as the way they used to look at it here in the past, like the first year that Dan Snyder owned the team, and he was handed a team in a weak division. There were a lot of injuries that year, and they went 10-6 and won the division, and he thought, I'll just add Deion Sanders and Bruce Smith and Jeff George, and we're going to win the stinking Super Bowl. Nah, doesn't work that way, and Adam Peters recognizes that, and I think Orlovsky is spot on there that, yes, those 5 games that they won on the last play, they could easily go in the opposite direction next year. And you see that year to year, The ball just doesn't bounce your way for whatever reason. And you also have to be in a position where it doesn't come down to the last play of the game, that you're more dominant. I used to get furious with Norv Turner, who had teams that were close after his first couple of years of rebuilding. They flirted with the playoffs. One year they went 9-7, didn't make it. And then the following year they went 8-7-1, didn't make it. And the year that they went 9-7, they were 8-3 and collapsed. And he would always talk about, we make a play here, we make a play there, we win the game. No, you got to make those plays. You got to make more plays than that. And it shouldn't come down to a play here or a play there. Now, it worked well in their favor, and it worked in a large part because of the way that Jaden Daniels is under pressure. He thrives in that situation. And so when they get down to the end of the games, but if that idiot Stevenson wasn't trying to fire up the crowd and playing in the position he was supposed to be playing on that Hail Mary pass against the Bears, they probably wouldn't have won that game. You know, a lot of things falling in place. And after that game, they went in one direction, the Bears went in another direction. And if you look at the stats from Caleb Williams, yeah, I mean, if you redid the draft, maybe you take Jaden Daniels number 1, but he wasn't that bad. He's on track to still be a great quarterback. So I think it's a very good point by Orlovsky that you cannot be thinking you're better than you are. The fan base can feel that way, but the organization can't, and I don't think they are. I think Adam Peters is smart enough to recognize, yes, we did win 5 games on the last play, and we can't count on that happening all the time. A couple of combine leftovers here, and the headline would indicate something that you might say, well, yeah, of course, that Shedeur Sanders put the talent evaluators in a position where, geez, who is this guy? And that according to what Josina Anderson, who's now an NFL insider, used to be with ESPN at one point, she says talent evaluators of 3 franchises took time to leak their interactions with Shedeur Sanders because they weren't fond of what they saw or heard from him. She tweeted some unflattering opinions from a quarterback's coach on a team with a top 7 pick. A source told Josina Anderson that the coach thought Sanders was, quote, brash and arrogant in his interview with the team, but the coach also seems to have an issue with the culture of athletes who have broad fame and financial success before entering the NFL. Well, that's the product of NIL. We didn't see that at all with Jaden Daniels, but I can understand that. Also, it's pointed out that during his media availability, that Shedeur Sanders seemed cordial, polite, witty, thoughtful, along with being confident. Well, where does he get that? From Dad, who owns the news conference better than Deion. He, quote, is literally Deion Sanders' son, and despite growing up different from most, seemed fairly grounded. It does seem that way. 2 other Sanders' criticisms came from teams holding top 10 picks. A representative of each team relayed their concerns about Sanders to Todd McShay, who's now a draft analyst. He also used to be with ESPN. McShay said one team thought Sanders did not take a professional approach, while the other team felt he wasn't taking the meeting seriously. It's not a response you're looking for from a potential suitor from somewhere you plan to play. And I think it's also important because people pull clips and have all sorts of things to say, and it's really important when I say this, there is no bad behavior. There was nothing disrespectful. It was not that kind of an altercation. I would say this. I think he's savvy. I think he's being interviewed by teams he doesn't want to play for. I think he's blowing the interview on purpose. Where'd he learn that? From Dad. Dad has said, Deion has said, there are teams that he doesn't want him to go to. So this was probably by design. And while you don't want these things leaking out about you, it also shouldn't be a surprise because, who knows how to run the show better than Deion, and who knows better to coach his son than Deion Sanders. Also this, Deion had his team back together the other day, and Deion, who was like the king of bling when he was playing, I guess never had earrings. I guess that wasn't his thing. And he's got a rule on his team that you are not allowed to wear your earrings in anything associated with the team, on the field, in meetings, anywhere else. And this video that they put out, everything that Deion does is put out on his website and video and all that. He says, we got one cat here with Band-Aids over his ears. What that mean? That means I'm going to wear my earrings, but I'm going to put a Band-Aid over them because I ain't going to listen to y'all because I ain't got no discipline. Does that mean that? What that mean? What that mean? That mean you're going to do it right. Forget us. Anybody else out there with earrings in? Anybody else besides one dude? Sanders gave the player a warning, telling him he'd be on the first thing smoking. I guess that means an airplane, although you don't want an airplane smoking. He said he'd be on the first thing smoking if he did it again. He said, come on out here and come out here like that again, please. I promise you'll be on the first thing smoking. You got that? And the player said, yes, sir. And Deion said, discipline. They were the most penalized team in the conference last year, 3rd most in the country, 107 penalties. And he said, off this past season, when they did finish 9-4, that they got to be better this year. So Deion and son making a little bit of off-the-field news there. Mike Rizzo sat down and talked with Amy Jennings of MASN. A couple of interesting nuggets as the Nationals get ready to launch the season. Plus, I'll have more thoughts on the new deal, which I think will dissolve MASN. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
This was news that broke when we were on the air yesterday, the announcement that the MASN dispute, which has been going on since the Montreal Expos became the Washington Nationals in 2005, has finally been resolved. All the money that they've been fighting over in court, that's been settled. And most importantly, after this season, the Nationals will be free to go wherever they want to go. The history on this is interesting because Peter Angelos, after the Senators left town, declared Washington his territory. And they did market very well to the D.C. area, and especially when they opened up the new ballpark, Camden Yards, in 1992, which is so accessible right off of 95. It was very easy for Nats fans to go there. I'll never forget when it opened up, Tony Kornheiser wrote a column in the Washington Post, and he said, forget baseball in D.C. This ballpark is too nice and too easy to get to. And for over a decade, he was right. But in 2005, we finally got a team, and the way that they were able to pacify the litigious Mr. Angelos was that baseball said, okay, fine. Here's how we're going to do this. You will control the television rights for both teams, and you will share the revenue with the Washington Nationals. And Major League Baseball, which at that time owned the Expos, wanted to get them the hell out of there. He knew that Washington was going to be a great situation. They could play at RFK for 3 years, and they'd have a brand new ballpark built with city funding opening in 2008, which is what happened. So they made this deal, and from what I've been told, part of the thinking on it was, well, Peter Angelos is in his 70s. How long is he going to live? Well, he didn't pass away till a year ago at the age of 94, and this dispute went on and on and on. The way this started out, and the Washington Times has a breakdown of the numbers of how this began. The Orioles were originally given 90% of the interest in MASN, Mid-Atlantic Sports Network. The Yankees and the Red Sox and maybe the Dodgers, a couple of teams that had this tremendous advantage for years and years before the explosion of cable TV, where they had their own network. So like the Yankees were making money on their own TV network, same with the Red Sox, and they were able to have a huge spending advantage over other teams, not to mention they were in major markets. So it got to the point where every team would have its own regional network, regional sports network. And it made sense when cable ruled the world. Well, streaming has changed a lot of things, and it's not what it was. But originally, the Orioles were given 90% ownership of MASN, and then Washington made a $75 million payment, and that gave them an initial 10%. So now it's down to 80% ownership for the Orioles. The agreement called for the Nationals' equity to increase 1% annually starting after the 2009 season with a cap of 33%. The network's rights payments to each team were set at $20 million apiece in 2005 and 2006, rising to $25 million in 2007, and $1 million annual increases through 2011. And initially, it was a good deal for the Nats because they were having trouble getting on cable systems. They couldn't get on Comcast. They were like, I forget the name of it. There was one in D.C. that they were on, but they had very little coverage the first year or two. And, you know, as time went on, there was litigation over who was owed what. Litigation over the 2012-2016 fees resulted in a 2019 decision that valued them at just under $300 million. After arguments that went to the New York Court of Appeals, the sides agreed to a settlement in 2023, but that was only for that period of time. What about the years since 2016? So this has been going back and forth for a long time, and when David Rubenstein bought the Orioles not long before Peter Angelo's death, he said he wanted to resolve this, and he did. This has been going on. The Nationals did win a World Series in the meantime. They did sign some big contracts, But in recent years, post-World Series, for a lot of reasons, not just the MASN dispute, the fact that the pandemic took all the steam out of the World Series, and you've had drop-off in player abilities, particularly Steven Strasburg, who got the $245 million deal and managed to pitch, I think, 30 innings before he threw in the towel. But as Barry Sberluga points out today, since that signing of Strasburg, what turned out to be a disastrous signing of $245 million, the only long-term deal that they signed, 3 years or more, went to catcher Keibert Ruiz, and that's relative chump change at 8 years at $50 million. So it wasn't a lot of money. As I said yesterday, what I think is going to happen is that the Nats play this season under the MASN deal. They're television free agents next year, and they go and they make a deal with Ted Leonsis for Monumental, and I think MASN folds up and the Orioles join him as well. It seems pretty simple. But as Barry points out in the column today, putting the Nats on Monumental may not be that simple. There are regional sports networks all over the country that have gone belly up. It's just not working for them anymore with people cutting the cord. So the plan from Rob Manfred, who just got the door slammed in his face by ESPN, according to reports, ESPN has been paying $550 million a year, which is what they're going to pay this year. But they were able to opt out of the deal after saying to Major League Baseball, yeah, we'll keep you around, but we're going to give you a 60% haircut. We want to drop the rights fees from $550 million to $200 million. Baseball walked away. So what they're talking about doing is bundling up as many teams under these regional sports network deals and having it under their control and selling it. And as Barry points out, well, you would want Washington and Baltimore, two good-sized markets, one of them a major market, and that would give you more leverage to sell it. That it could be in play too. So before you say slam dunk, it goes to Ted Leonsis, think about that. The thing that would really, really want Leonsis, the reason he wants it, well, twofold. One, he wants programming in the summer when the Caps and the Wizards aren't playing. That's huge. But the other part of it is he wants leverage for his streaming, which is the way everything is going. So what you're going to have in the springtime, when the Caps and the Wizards are still playing and baseball's underway, you're going to have conflicts. You can't, even though you have two channels, you can't put both teams on them. And then some nights you may even have both the Wizards and the Caps playing. And I would think baseball gets a back seat. That could be streaming only. And he's trying to push his streaming only for Monumental.com. So that's going to give him leverage in that. So a lot of things in play there. But I would say overall, it's a good thing that they're out from underneath the control of the Orioles. And I think the Orioles are not going to want to be in the broadcasting business the way things are going. Rubenstein is a very shrewd businessman. He may start his own streaming/cable service, though I don't know how financially viable that would be. I would think, and he's friends with Leonsis. In fact, at one point, there was discussion that Rubenstein and Leonsis were going to team up to try to buy the Nats. That's before Rubenstein bought his own hometown team, the Orioles. But I would think that there could be common ground there to work out a deal. So we'll see. Anyway, Mike Rizzo, general manager, did an interview yesterday with MASN, so they're not going to be discussing a possible exit of his team from their network. But Amy Jennings, who works with MASN, did talk to Rizzo about a variety of things, including what he saw last year with a 71-win team, same as the year before, but the kind of growth that he saw from his young team.
Our young players took the positive step forward, which was probably the most inspirational part of last season. Was you saw these young players getting a season or partial season under their belt at the big league level, and you could see the talent oozing from every tool that they have, and you're excited about it. We also saw what we did poorly. We didn't pick the ball up very well. We ran the bases carelessly at times, but very aggressively, and we saw our shortcomings offensively where we didn't hit many. We didn't use the long ball well enough, and so we thought that going into this winter that we would try and cure those things and try and address those things in the trade market and the free agent market.
one of your bigger moves this offseason was that trade for Nathaniel Lowe. Just what kind of value do you think he can bring to such an important defensive position on a young team?
Well, a great player, a great personality, and a great person. You know, he's a true Nationals type of player. You know, he's between the lines. He's great in the clubhouse. He's outstanding in the community. He's outstanding. So, you know, he's the type of guy, makeup-wise, that we look for, and talent-wise. You know, you've got a guy who's won a Silver Slugger. He's won a Gold Glove. He's won a World Championship, and all those things are that come into play and impact our organization in a positive way.
A lot of last year, like you mentioned, was being aggressive on the bases, kind of manufacturing runs. But you prioritized getting power this offseason. Just how different do you think the middle of this lineup is going to look compared to last year?
Well, I think there'll be more. It'll be a veteran-laden middle of the lineup. You know, we'll have the table setters up top, and then, you know, some veteran guys in the middle to go along with, you know, with the good young core of guys that we have. And we trust the good young core. We think that they're going to take the next step in their development and become really good big league players, and I think that with that veteran presence and you know, taking a little bit of onus off of them, off the pressure off of them to produce each and every day, I think will be beneficial for them.
We know how important pitching is to you, and I don't want to jinx anything right now, so I'm not going to talk about the depth that you have. But for the young guys the young arms that took a huge step in 2024, do you feel like that core group is really moving you towards your goals of the future?
I think it is, because, you know, with starting pitching, anything is possible. And I think that we've amassed ourselves a really good, deep, talented staff of starting pitching candidates. You know, starts at the top with Irvin and Gore and that group, and continues all the way down 7, 8, 9, 10 deep, going into not only with major league experience, but with guys with that are at our upper minor leagues that are going to impact this big league club in the near future.
You added Shinosuke to that depth in competition this spring. What was that scouting process like for him and breaking through in that Asian market?
Yeah, it was, you know, like I always say, it takes two to tango. So, you know, we scouted him vehemently. We had several of our best scouts had gone to Japan, you know, over the years, and we had a little dossier on Shino and his career, and when it came down to you know, picking a team, we had a relationship with he and his representatives, and that assisted us in this. And I think that we've got ourselves a guy that is proven in the top league in Japan, that you know, he's been an all-star. He logs innings. He's a really good, solid starting pitcher, and we think that his stuff, his attitude, his makeup translates into the big leagues.
Josh Bell, a veteran power bat that you got back, what were those conversations like with him, and why do you think that he wanted to come back to D.C.? I
think he had a great time here. You know, we put a lot of onus on him and a lot of pressure on him when he was here the first time to, you know, kind of carry us at the first base position, you know, offensively and defensively. But what he impressed me with, you know, he's a professional, he's a pro's pro, and he's a guy that takes pride in the offensive and defensive part of his game. But what he does in the clubhouse and what he does in the community, and just the person he is just remarkable, and a guy near and dear to my heart, a guy that you know is as good a teammate as I've ever been around.
How big was getting Kyle Finnegan back and having something solidified in that closer role?
Yeah, you know, Finn's a guy that you know we took a chance at years ago, and he's made the most of it. He's made himself an all-star caliber relief pitcher. What I like about him is, you know, the saves are great, they're sexy, and that's a good part of that's a big part of being a relief pitcher. But this guy, the way he goes after it, he takes the ball, he never says no. He's a workhorse. He's a tough guy, and he goes right after the hitter. And you know what I like is 38 saves and 43 attempts, I think it was. But win, lose or draw, he's at his locker taking questions and taking on the responsibility of the accountability for his performance.
Too early to talk about the draft, but just how big is it going into it, knowing you have your choice of literally whoever you want?
Yeah, it's unfortunately it's my fourth time, and I've done this in my career. The other three times we've gotten outstanding baseball players. Danny Haas and his group of guys are circling the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico to find that next guy, and I trust that we're going to get ourselves a really good impact big league player in July.
Now that Cruz and Wood are here at the start of the season, the core's really arrived. What can Nationals fans expect out of this season?
Well, I expect to play with our hair on fire, to give 100% each and every at bat, grind it out, pitch by pitch, at bat by at bat, game by game, series by series, and really, really compete against one of the best divisions in baseball, and in the National League is really tough, but really be a team that other teams don't want to play.
Wins and losses are everything, but outside of the record, is there any other way that you measure success from season to season?
No, I think wins and losses is what it's all about. Making the playoffs is the first step. Winning championships is the finale of our efforts. But the way we play, the way the development of the young kids is very important to us, because if they develop the way that we want them to, it will coincide with winning baseball games.
That's Mike Rizzo, Nats GM, talking to Amy Jennings of MASN with things other than the MASN story, which was the number one baseball story in town yesterday, as the Nats will be able to leave at the end of the season, and that long 20-year battle over money is finally over. So yesterday, and not that this would be a surprise if you watched any of the pregame coverage before the Super Bowl, they did this really emotional tribute to Jimmie Johnson, and they used AI to portray him through the years, going back to his days in high school in Port Arthur, Texas, and his playing career at Arkansas, and his coaching career in college and the pros, and all of his years at Fox. It was clearly a farewell. And then Kurt Menefee said, well, is this it? And he goes, one step at a time here. So yesterday was that final step in the goodbye to Jimmie Johnson, as he announced it on the Colin Cowherd Show.
I've made an extremely difficult decision. I've been thinking about it for the last 4 or 5 years, and I've decided to retire from Fox. And I'm going to miss it. I'm going to miss all the guys, and I'll see them occasionally. But it has been a great run starting back 31 years ago.
Yeah, and he was there 25 years with his coaching stint in Miami in between. And look, he's 81 years old. He looks great. But at 81, anyone should be allowed to retire. But look at what his job has been for those 25 years at Fox. It's essentially 20 Sundays a year yucking it up and watching football with a bunch of ex-players. Everybody's got to do something in retirement. It would seem that doing that 20 days a year for millions of dollars might be what we would call retirement. So my thoughts when I heard Jimmie Johnson was, quote unquote, retiring, my mind drifted to a 1960s sitcom, which was called Petticoat Junction. And it was about a hotel in a small town called the Shady Rest. And among the people that lived at the Shady Rest as, I guess, a caretaker was Edgar Buchanan playing Uncle Joe. And in one episode, Uncle Joe announced this.
Kids, I'm going to hit you with a stunning announcement. Maybe you'd like to sit down.
Oh, I know. I think if we brace ourselves, we might be able to take it standing up.
What is it, Uncle Joe?
As of today, I, Joseph B. Carson, am going into retirement. Yeah, did something go down the wrong way?
I'll say. You're going into retirement?
Steve, what are you retiring from?
Yes, exactly. What are you retiring from? You're retiring from hanging out with your buddies, watching football, and guffawing at each other. It doesn't seem like that tough of a job. But, again, he's got plenty of money, so he can do what he wants to do. He's even had a deal, because he lives in Florida, he's even had a deal where he doesn't have to show up in Los Angeles to do the show on the set when they only have one game. When Fox has a doubleheader, they ask him to be there. Otherwise, he's on remote. I mean, it seems like the greatest deal you could possibly have, and, kind of like how I view radio. You don't retire, they retire you. And from what I gleaned from the conversation yesterday that he had with Colin Cowherd, that they had to talk him into coming back the last few years. He was thinking of retiring earlier, and they wanted him to stay. But I guess he acquiesced the last few years, but enough is enough. And at 81, he's walking away and talked about, what his role really was on the set. He was a coach throughout his career, going back to after he left Arkansas and became a graduate assistant, working his way up to become a head coach. He was at Oklahoma State, coached Dexter Manley there, made his way to Miami, won a national championship there, won the back-to-back Super Bowls in Dallas, had a falling out with Jerry Jones, goes to Fox when they launch in 1994, works there for a couple years. Then he goes to the Miami Dolphins with a little bit of tread left on the tire for Dan Marino. In fact, Jimmy agitated for that job. Once he had moved to Florida, where he's got a house off the Keys and a boat, which he spends a lot of time on, he said, I'd like to coach, but I don't really want to move. So I'd like to coach the Dolphins. And he kind of pushed Don Shula out the door. Now, Shula coached forever, and he's still the winningest coach of all time, but he's only 65 when he was forced out. Shula started coaching the Baltimore Colts when he was 32 years old. And Jimmy wanted that job, and he got that job. But although he had a winning record, he was 64-36 when he was there. They were 2-3 in the playoffs, and his last game lost a wild card game to the Seattle Seahawks, and then called it a career. I believe that was his last. That might have been the last game for Dan Marino too, as far as I know. But anyway, this was Jimmy talking yesterday to Colin Cowherd about the relationship that he has on the set with Terry and Howie Long and Michael Strahan and Kurt Menefee and how he fits in with that group.
And you look at the guys on the set, not only are they best friends, but, I watched Terry play in college when he was at Woodlawn High School, and we recruited him for Louisiana Tech. I coached Howie Long in the blue-gray game when he just left Villanova. I had Michael Strahan there in Dallas, and I was going to draft him, and he reminds me of it many, many times. And when it was a mistake, I was trying to get him cheap, and New York jumped in front of me, so I wasn't able to draft him. I actually had a scout in his home on draft day. And so we're all very, very close. And Kurt Menefee he was in Dallas when I was in Dallas. And so it was just natural for me to be somewhat of a coach. And Bill Richards, who, I love to death, he kiddingly calls me assistant producer because I would have suggestions on what to do on maybe our on the field segment, etc. So I just kind of played the same role that I played for many, many years as a head football coach.
Jimmy, there's a handful of people that have done it, none better than you. You were a dominant college coach. That's hard. Then you were a dominant NFL coach. I think that's harder. You were also then, you're a Hall of Famer, broadcasting Hall of Famer. They're all hard. How are you able... College coaching and pro coaching is different. Now, it's a little more similar now than it was in your day. Was there ever a moment, you're a Hall of Famer, football, broadcasting, college. Do guys like you ever have self-doubt? Was there ever a moment in Dallas, that first year, you thought, this is I've been asked to chew. I'm not sure I bit off too much.
Colin, absolutely not. I can tell you the story, and Dave Wanstead and Tony Wise, they can verify this. When I was at Oklahoma State University, I went to a little restaurant, and we were struggling. I said, guys, hang with me. We're going to win a national championship. And we were at Ancestor Restaurant, and we ended up winning a national championship at University of Miami because I took all of them with me. And we were going through that 1 in 15 year. We went to a little Mexican restaurant right there close to Valley Ranch. And I told the guys, I said, listen, we're making some moves now that are going to hurt us in the short term. We traded our starting quarterback. We cut the leading receiver because he couldn't play the caliber that we wanted. And we made some trades, obviously trading Herschel Walker, but we made 51 trades in 5 years. And I told the guys, I said, listen, I know it's a real struggle right now, but you hang with me because we're going to win a Super Bowl. And that's it. I mean, I might have sounded like a crazy man because we were going 1-15. But I said, we're making some moves now that are going to help us 3 years from now. And so you say, was there any doubt? No, there wasn't any doubt. And it wasn't that we had a dream. And I said this at the Hall of Fame induction. We didn't dream. We truly believed that we were going to get it done. I think if you believe that you're going to get it done, you work to make it happen. If you dream, you're hoping that it happens. But we worked to make sure it happened.
And Jimmie Johnson, when he was at Arkansas, was a psychology major. And he understood people. And he was, I think, one of the first to really express this. It's 53 coaching jobs for 53 different players. And, he would be funny about it. He'd say, if a third-string offensive lineman falls asleep in a meeting, you cut him on the spot. If Troy Aikman falls asleep in the meeting, you say, wake up, Troy. Understand all of that. But the confidence thing was big because when he coached, he would never call a player over on the sideline for either a timeout situation with a quarterback or anything else. He would say, this is what we're going to do. And he would never say, well, if this happens or if we don't make it on this first down. He would always talk in those terms. And that was part of his coaching legacy as well. Asked at the end of the conversation, and one of the things about going through a Colin Cowherd interview is his questions go on forever because they're often about him. But he does get a few nuggets out of people, and he got this out of Jimmie as to what his legacy he hopes will be. As I guess he'll appear from time to time on various things, but as far as a working life at 81, that seems to be over.
The thing I try to do is I try to bring out the best in everybody. Everybody that I came into contact with. And I tried to have some interaction. The way you bring out the best in people is you have interaction with them. You communicate with them. The biggest problems I ever had with anybody is when I didn't communicate. And that's what happened to Jerry and I on our relationship until it got fixed here later on, is we stopped communicating. It never gets better if you don't talk about it. It never gets better if you don't interact and, not necessarily, pumping somebody up and praising them, but, just acknowledging them, and saying, hey, you need to pick it up a little bit, maybe in a kidding way, but you need to have some interaction with individuals. But I tried to bring out the best in everybody that I came into contact with. I don't care what their role was. I don't care how important they were. I don't care if they were a Hall of Fame player or an intern on our set. I tried to bring out the best in everybody.
John Thompson used to say that he'd rather have an adversarial relationship with a player than no relationship at all. He'd rather they be yelling at each other's faces. And believe me, I saw Big John ramp up from 0 to 60 in no time. He had a temper. But he said he'd rather have that because you're communicating. And great coaches understand this. And that's what helped to make Jimmie as successful as he was. In terms of actual coaching, he always had an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. He was the CEO. He ran the whole thing. And in some ways, he would coach the team through the media. Things that he would say that he knew would get back to players. That was a way that he did things, and he was very effective at it. And this will remain one of the greatest what-ifs in sports. What he and Jerry put together, winning 2 Super Bowls in 5 years, going from 1-15 to back-to-back championships, and the parts were still in place so that Barry Switzer, who was a terrible NFL coach, he may have done well in college, but he was a terrible head coach in the NFL, he still had enough parts left to get to the championship the year after Jimmie left, losing to the 49ers, and then a year later winning the Super Bowl again. So what they had built, had they managed to sustain it, had the ego of Jerry not intersected with, let's face it, the massive ego of Jimmie, too. You had to have that to be as successful as he was. If they'd have managed to work together, if Jerry would have understood, and Jimmie said the first couple of years it was fine because Jerry had mortgaged everything to buy the team, and he was trying to get the money back to get going. And once they were successful and he'd recouped a lot of it, that's when he started to meddle with the football team, and that's when it fell apart. But had they stayed together, what became 3 championships for Jerry over 4 years, if he had Jimmie, could they have won 6 or 7 over a 10 or 11-year period if it lasted that long? We'll never find out, but that remains a great what if. All right, coming up in the next hour, Peter Schrager of the NFL Network has a really good explanation of what the Combine is all about. I watched 0 seconds of it. I don't know how much you watched, but I didn't see any of it. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. You know, it wasn't that long ago that Tom Brady, in his 40s, on the open market, was desired by many, many teams. Who's going to wind up with the 6-time Super Bowl champ who clearly still can play? And it turned out to be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they instantly won a Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers, who's also going to go to the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. He has 1 Super Bowl championship. Seems to be walking around knocking on doors. Hey, would you like to have a Super Bowl winning quarterback who can still play? Some advice for Aaron Rodgers from one of the greats of all time, Steve Young, who was on the Rich Eisen Show. We'll get to that later in the hour. A lot of football to talk about here with look back at the Combine. I'm not going to go over Combine numbers. Trust me. I think I want to take a broader look at the Combine, which I will get to. I meant to get to this yesterday. We just ran out of time. But I saw a story, and it's not a big story in any way, but I think it's representative of the way we spend money now. Now, you heard that Trump wants to stop production of pennies. What that's going to mean, I don't know. And in terms of cash and how I spend cash, man, it is so rare that I open up my wallet to spend cash that when I pull out a bill, it's like almost permanently folded. You know what I mean? Like, when it comes out, it's got a natural bend in it. And the only time I spend cash on a regular basis, and this is really only like every 5 weeks or so, is when I get my hair cut and I tip the barber in cash. And that's only because there's a sign up there that says we don't accept tips on credit cards. So, okay, happy to do that. Restaurants, I know it's probably better for the waitstaff if you do tip in cash, but I just like to make it easy, and I just put in a number on the receipt from the credit card. So I rarely spend any cash at all, which leads to this story that I saw in the New York Post, and it says, a Newark man allegedly stole over $18,000 and caused $10,000 in damages during a string of robberies at Dunkin' Donuts. He hit up 14 locations. So this is Dunkin' Donuts, where people are coming and going all day long, and the transactions, I think most of them are under $6 or $7. You buy a cup of coffee, maybe you get a donut with it. You might buy a breakfast sandwich. Sometimes it goes a little bit over that, but it's not a lot of money in each transaction. Yet, quite obviously, he had to hit quite a few Dunkin' Donuts to get $18,000. There were 14 of them. So he's pulled in an average of what, $1,100 per hit, $1,200, whatever the math is. His name is Bowman. I can't pronounce his first name. Bowman turned himself in February 24th after authorities identified him as a suspect during a weeks-long investigation. Through December and January, Bowman allegedly broke into 14 Dunkin' Donuts after hours and stole anywhere between $700 and $3,000 at each. At one location in Edison, he walked out empty-handed, but left behind $500 worth of damage, according to the Hackensack Police Department. There was, no cash in there. And you might say, well, this was at night, and maybe they clean out the register at the end of the day. I just don't think people are spending cash anymore. And according to this report, he attempted to hit up a 15th store but was unsuccessful. He operated on a strict schedule, hitting 3 or 4 locations every week or two, according to police. His typical prowl stretched from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. He allegedly brought home thousands each time, but in some of them, he found nothing. Detectives were unable to link all 14 breakups, which presumed that Bowman, which pressured Bowman to, they were able to link up the robberies, so that pressured him into surrendering to the cops. Faces a bunch of charges, 14 counts of third-degree burglary, attempted burglary, 12 counts of theft, criminal mischief, et cetera, et cetera. But the larger issue is that this thief had to hit up 14 different Dunkin' Donuts to get $18,000 in cash. You know, that's just incredible how little cash is now spent. And if you look at your own spending habits, I mean, how many times? Some people are cash people. And I'll tell you, it's a really cool thing. Like when you go to an expensive, steakhouse or something, and you just, throw down $150 or whatever, your share of it is. That's a pretty cool move. And it's easier to split the check. Although nowadays, if you're having lunch, even with like 4 different people, they'll do 4 different credit cards. That's no big deal. So I just think about the way we spend cash now, and a story like that just highlights it to me. How little we go to the wallet for the green bills, and how often we go for the plastic. It's just the way we live right now. And I'm not savvy enough, but there are people like my kids who do Venmo and stuff like that. So they never deal with even credit cards anymore. It just directly transfers from one account to another. That's where we are. All right, Combine. A lot of time spent yakking about the Combine on the various shows on ESPN and Fox and so forth. And the reason is the NFL is king. As we were talking about in the last hour with the MASN deal and where baseball is, we just had ESPN opt out of its contract with Major League Baseball, where they were paying them $550 million a year. They wanted to reduce it to $200 million. They said to Major League Baseball, we need you to take a 60% pay cut to stay on the network. And Rob Manfred said, nope, we're out. We're getting out. We'll see if we can make ourselves a better deal. Well, they may not be able to do that. That's where baseball is, apparently, on the interest scale. There are still people who love baseball, and I like to watch baseball games. I like to go to baseball games. But in terms of eyeballs to the television set, it's football. And so they now, and they never used to do this. I've probably told you this. When I worked with Mel Kiper like 20 years ago, he said, no, I don't go to the Combine. They don't let you in. And I think he still doesn't go to the Combine, but he's able to watch the whole thing on TV. But again, here's the number 1 draft analyst in the history of football, and he wasn't going to the Combine because there wasn't any value in it. Well, now they televise it live, and we obsess over 40 times and high jump times and hand size and all that mishigas. And what does it mean? What's the meaning of it? Peter Schrager is with the NFL Network, the network that televises the Combine. And he was there this past week in Indianapolis, and yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show kind of explained what all this nonsense is about.
I can't stress this enough. The Combine drills go on from Thursday to Sunday, and it's on NFL Network, and it's Rich Eisen and Daniel Jeremiah, and that is the sizzle, that is the steak. But what's really going on, and really the importance of the Combine, is that you've got representatives from all 32 teams. Even if the head coach didn't show up this year, there are a bunch of 49ers people there. And there's conversations happening all week because everyone's in the same place at the same time. This is where deals are done. And guess what? Every NFL agent is there as well. So I talked to a GM and I said, well, what do you think of this workout? I couldn't really watch the workouts. We'll watch the tape. I had meetings with agents from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. And that's every agent. From the biggest agent, you could talk to Joel Siegel and Drew Rosenhaus, or from the smallest agent who has one player who might be an undrafted guy. They take the meetings there. So their dance card is full. And that's where a lot of these deals are at least discussed and get the value. And you can't make a deal. But what you could say is, hey, here's what we're hearing. This is what our player is likely going to be getting. If you're interested, let us know when the legal tampering deal starts happening. Now, you add in the fact that there's media members, and it's when we get our rumors and our stuff. But I'll say it openly because I was publicly with them, but like I had breakfast with Brandon Beane, the GM of the Bills, and Joe Shane, the GM of the Giants. And we didn't meet in a suite in a Marriott somewhere and quietly with the phones plugged out. We met at a breakfast spot called Patachu, and there was 100 other people in the media there, and there was 100 different GMs there, and everyone sees us all talking. And Eric DaCosta's having breakfast over there, and Howie Roseman's having breakfast over there. And this is how it is. It's everyone's talking. We're all getting our information, but we're also trading information and just seeing people we don't see during the year.
What do you think happens leading up to the draft? Any moves that are made?
I think free agency this year is really interesting because you've got a bunch of these quarterbacks and a little bit of a carousel, but I don't know necessarily the market is there for like Sam Darnold. If you had told me week 17 that Sam Darnold was going to hit free agency, I'd say there would be a line out the door. I don't know Sam Darnold's market right now. In fact, it went from being, no doubt Minnesota has to bring him back. Those 8 days where they had the season finale on Sunday night against the Lions and then lost on the Monday night 8 days later to the Rams. Like, I don't know. That could have cost Sam Darnold millions and millions and millions of dollars. And I don't have a team for him right now where it's going to be, let's spill over ourselves and give Sam Darnold that $100 million contract. Once Stafford was taken care of, I think Darnold's the next piece. I think Rodgers is an interesting piece. I think Justin Fields is going to have a market. Young quarterback, did well in Pittsburgh. I think Fields might have multiple teams vying for him to be their number one. And then you have this next tier of like, what do we do with Russell Wilson? Where's Kirk Cousins going? And then it's guys like Jared Stidham and Taylor Heineke. Like, they can play in this league. That's what's next coming out of the combine, because we have a lot of teams that are going to be looking at two quarterbacks, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, up there in the top. But like, there's only so many teams that can get those guys, and you've got these other veterans that might be able to fill that hole right now and might give those coaches and GMs a better chance to win than taking a rookie in the top 5.
You know what's nuts about the whole thing, and that's Peter Schrager of the NFL Network on the Darnold situation. If he had an injury that prevented him from playing in the last regular season game of the year for the Vikings, which was a winner-take-all for the division. They played Detroit, and the winner would get the division title, and the loser would have to play a first-round playoff game on the road. If he had gotten hurt before that last regular season game and couldn't play the rest of the year, his value would be through the roof, because through the first 16 games of the season, he was tremendous. He was revived. And now, who knows? The latest is that the Vikings are not going to franchise him, that they're ready to move on to J.J. McCarthy. That doesn't mean they're not going to try and re-sign him, but they're not going to pay him franchise money, and who knows who wants him. As far as Stafford goes, Eisen said this yesterday on his show that he heard at the Combine, and this is what Schrager is telling you there. Pretty much at the Combine, it's all about people talking to each other. That's really what happens here. And they tell you things, and you hear secrets. It's a big convention of football people, and when they get together, they're sharing information, and information sometimes they want to share, and sometimes information that slips out. Eisen said, and he was there for the 4 days, he said, I heard the Giants and the Raiders' interest in Matthew Stafford was quite real, and it was hairy at certain junctures, and I heard the Giants hit the number, and they hit the trade comp. They were in. The Giants even hired Matt Stafford's brother-in-law, Chad Hall, on the coaching staff. They made a run, and ultimately he decided to stay in Los Angeles. And I don't know if he was ever going to leave, but the fact that the team told him it was okay to leave is really kind of crazy. It was okay to shop around, I should say, and that they would, I guess, let him set his own market, which he did, and now he's coming back to play in Los Angeles. That's it for me. Bram is coming up next, and I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.